Bibles to 2 Timothy chapter 2. A few weeks ago, I asked the question, one that I challenged you to think about and to pray about, but what is your role in the discipleship process? In what way are you fulfilling the Great Commission given by Jesus to his church? And for the last few weeks, we've been touching on what a mentor, what a discipler looks like, and the kinds of things he or she, would expect. So this is between Paul, the mentor, and Timothy, his disciplee. And this kind of mentorship that we've seen between Paul and Timothy is less common in the church than we would think. And so we started this thought of discipleship as demonstrated by Paul is relational, it is authoritative, it is raw or vulnerable, and it is based from one's experiences to another experiences. And so that's R.A.R.E. It's rare discipleship. Now, for the purposes of here this morning, I would like us to think of discipleship like this. There are a lot of definitions of what discipleship or mentorship is. And I would like us to think about it in regards to it this way. Discipleship is leading another into a thriving relationship with Jesus Christ. Leading another into a thriving relationship with Jesus Christ. And it is this partnership where a more experienced Christian helps younger Christians thrive. Now, if we think about this, you would actually think that this process of investing into another's life would be celebrated and remembered. And this trainer would be respected by other fellow Christians. But we find here in 2 Timothy that actually is not the case sometimes. Paul ends up being completely abandoned by a group that he had been investing in. So look at 2 Timothy. We'll look at chapter 1 and look at verse 15. He says, "You are all aware that all who are in Asia," this is Asia Minor, you could think about this in it's Turkey, it's modern day Turkey, "turned away from me, among whom are Pelagius and Hermogenes. May the Lord grant mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. But when he arrived in Rome, he searched for me earnestly and found me. May the Lord grant him to find mercy from the Lord on that day. And you well know all the service he rendered at Ephesus." And I looked and trying to figure out the context of what exactly is going on here. I mean, you have this all in verse 15, "who are in Asia turned away from me." If you've read through Acts, the book of Acts, just to catch others up, Paul was the leading missionary into Asia. You have the Apostle Peter. They were very Jerusalem-based and Judea-based, and they were there. Paul was the one who was running around the Roman Empire, sharing Jesus and starting churches. And I want you to think about this. This individual, Paul, pretty much you could say the reason why Christianity spread like it did was because of the ministry of Paul. And Paul straight up says to Timothy, "Everyone has abandoned me here in Asia." His missionary team had abandoned him. Now, as a pastor, I couldn't even imagine how heartbreaking this would be. You spent all this time in investing and building and getting these churches going, and you have this missionary team set up. You've let these people in charge because you're going and you're doing other things. And you have this group set up. You're like, this is the team that's going to keep ministering here and keep starting churches. And then you find out someday, get a letter, yeah, we have sort of changed our minds. We're going to go this way instead. And we don't know what was exactly going on here, but we know they turned away. And so is it possible, see, Peter's in jail right now. Is it possible that when Paul was arrested, that everyone's like, we can't be known with a convicted felon. You know, we are above that. We don't break the law. And so do they depart that way? Is that why Paul was repeatedly emphasizing to Timothy, do not abandon me here in jail? Or have they not only departed from Paul, as a person, but they've actually departed from the Pauline perspective of Christianity, one where Christianity is not done by works, but it is through salvation in faith in the work of Jesus, which is something Paul emphasized so much through his ministry. We don't exactly know. But we can get this from what Paul is telling Timothy here. Do not be like them. Those guys over there, he names them by names, Pelagius and Hermogenes, don't be like them. That is not how you want to be. And you think about this, it has been about 2,000 years. Everybody knows these two for all time, because the word of God does not fade away. So even in heaven, we will know of these two and how they abandoned Paul. Ugh. Talk about messing up. The age of the internet, yeah, your sins are forever, but just wait a few days and someone else's sins will be far more worse than yours. See, so you can actually hold on. Not here. Everyone knows of these two. You are aware of all who are in Asia turned away from thee. Among these two, and they're probably leaders of the group, they abandoned and led this missionary team away from Paul. Do not be like them. They're like the Benedict Arnolds of Paul, or the Judases. Ugh. Do not be like them. And so we're like, man, that sounds sort of mean. He's naming names and stuff. And I think we see here, remember how rare discipleship is based on your experiences? It's very raw. That's what we're seeing right here. Paul is saying, these two led a movement against me. Don't be like them. He names names. He just lays it out. Do not be like one of them. And so we're seeing here in this mental relationship, sometimes you have to name names. You can bounce around it for a little bit, but sometimes you're like, don't be like this person. They're not good news. Be someone different. Well, let's see what he keeps saying in verses 16. He says, may the Lord grant mercy. Now, every once in a while, when you see mercy or grace, they're used interchangeably. So when I was a child and I went through the Awana program, I learned a definition for mercy and grace. And grace was God giving me what I do not deserve. And mercy was God not giving me what I do deserve. Sometimes, though, which you learn as you study, they're sort of used interchangeably. So mercy looks like grace and grace looks like mercy. And that's what we're seeing here is God may, and it's like this sort of passive, you know how you can be passive aggressive to people? This is like passive ablessive. Like blessing, that's pretty much your vocabulary for this week. Passive ablessive. He's like, may the Lord bless, give mercy to the household of Onesiphorus. Onesiphorus, that's it. I hate this name, Onesiphorus. That is the correct pronunciation. This is the only time you're probably getting it. Onesiphorus. Okay. There you go. Oni, for he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. So I think, and this is why I'm, like this, you're not going to die on it. I think there seems to be they were ashamed of Paul's chains. Can't die on it, but that's sort of why we think that. But when he arrived in Rome, he searched for me earnestly and found me. So there was a few kinds of prison sentences. There's a variety of them. But there was a prison sentence where you'd pretty much get thrown into the arena. There was a prison sentence where you would be under house arrest, and you would be, someone would have rented you a house or a room to stay in. And so it wasn't, it was an okay setup. And then there was a kind where you were sort of thrown into a hole with bars on top. And either way, you walk into the city of Rome. They did not have the internet. You could not search the Rome prisoner database. You walk into this giant city on foot, and you're like, okay, Paul's in prison. Because they had lots of prisoners. This is Rome, the capital. How do you find a guy like that? Walk up to the first guard. Hey, I'm looking for a probably maybe balding, older gentleman, beard, 2 eyes, and a nose. Huh. Yeah. You know what? Go talk to Joe down the street there. Like how when you ask to speak to a manager and they pretty much pause for a few seconds, and they come back and you're pretty sure you're just talking to them with a different voice. Yeah, this is the manager speaking. Sort of like with this, how do you find a prisoner in Rome? And so when Paul says he searched for me earnestly and found me, this is a huge compliment. This reveals the character of this man. One, he was not ashamed of Paul. Not only when he got to Rome, he was determined to find Paul. And not only was he determined to find Paul, but he was also determined to refresh him. He was determined to, because you didn't really get good food. They weren't responsible for your food. You were just in jail. So here he comes, and he found him, he looked for him, and he refreshed him. He took care of him. So the idea is, don't be like those two, but be like this guy. Timothy, don't be like those who abandoned me and abandoned the cause of Jesus, but be like Onesiphorus. He refreshed. He earnestly searched me out and found me. And he says, may the Lord grant him to find mercy from the Lord on that day. What day are we talking about? And I think a way to think about this is, if you have identified yourself with Paul, and like Paul said last week, if you are not ashamed of Paul, you are not ashamed of the message of Jesus, there's no question that Onesiphorus was saved, that he had a relationship with Jesus Christ. Why else would you go into the city of Rome, find a guy who is the apostle and teacher of this religion if you didn't buy into it? It doesn't make any sense. So the day here is actually the day where all Christians sort of have to come before God and to give an account. And God's like, what did you do with the responsibility that I gave you? Well, I did this and this. Jesus like, good, well done. But there's other Christians who will stand before him and God, and Jesus will be like, what did you do for me? They're like, I didn't do much. And you have to stand before your Creator, your Savior, and say, I blew it. And so Paul's passive-aggressive prayer here is, may God see what Onesiphorus did for me. See it and celebrate it and remember it. And on that day when you have to give an account, Jesus is like, Onesiphorus, what did you do for me? And he's like, I found your servant Paul, and I did the best job I could, and I refreshed him. Because I knew that he was following you, and that's why he was in jail. And I wanted to partner with him and partner with you. So hopefully he could get out of prison and continue his work. And then Paul attaches him to the experiences of Timothy, as he says here at the end of verse 18, and you well know all the service he rendered at Ephesus. So what Paul has said is, Timothy, don't be like him, or don't be like these two, be like him. And now that you saw what he did and the type of person he was at the church of Ephesus, where we think Timothy is actually pastoring here. So do not be like them, but be like him. So the question for you this morning is, who are you? Second Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. And we're going to use these verses here this week, and then we're going to sort of expound on them here next week. To see the transition, you then, my child. So don't be like them, be like him. You then, my child, showing the relationship. Be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to other faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And I think sometimes these chapter marks can throw us off, but Paul goes right from do not be like them, but be like him. And this is your responsibility to hand off and to share what I have learned with other faithful individuals like Onesiphorus, other individuals like them who will be able to take what I have taught you and take that and be able to teach others. This is the call of discipleship. You, from what you've learned from me, take it and invest it into others, who will then invest it into others. So the question is, who are you? Are you them? Or are you him? Are you Timothy? Are you Paul? So now you guys are like, okay, I technically could be done right now with my sermon, but I still have a whopping 10 minutes. And this is where I wanted to take this passage, have us take a step back and begin to look at what's playing out here and how it connects with our church here at Tumwater First. So, you guys ready for this? Get your papers, get your notes out. This excites me. So if you think about what we've just studied, I want you to think about how many different people that Paul talks about, okay? So you have Paul teaching Timothy, bragging about a partner in ministry. But he also mentions future people. But we're not even going to bring in the other two because their example wasn't too good, was it? But you have Paul teaching Timothy, talking about a partner in ministry, and future people here. See, in regards to Christianity, there is this general command of making disciples. And for our purpose this morning is a disciple is leading another into a thriving relationship with Jesus Christ. Leading someone, getting someone to a thriving point in Jesus Christ. And so if we take it this way, then what Paul is saying is what you've heard from me about how to be in a thriving relationship with Jesus Christ, I want you to teach and show other people how to have a thriving relationship with Jesus Christ so they can teach other people how to have a thriving relationship with Jesus Christ. We stand on the shoulders of Paul and Timothy and those he's trained. We stand on their shoulders. That is a lot of shoulders over 2,000 years. It's a neat place to be. And our future generations will, Lord willing, stand on ours. And they will stand and they will teach others. Now, anyone who has committed his life to Jesus through faith in what Jesus has done, you can testify that your relationship with Jesus is a process. Hopefully you can say, today I am closer to Jesus than I was at the beginning. Some of us can say, I have been walking with Jesus or trying to for 40 years. 50 years. We can keep going. Others of us can say, I've been walking with Jesus for a few years. And there's a drastic difference in then and now. We see this process. And what's fun is if we look at the process, what we have, before you came to know Jesus, you were spectating. You were watching. You were checking things out. You were looking. You were like, I don't know about this. And if we look at the Gospels, we saw the crowds following Jesus. You guys know those crowds? The crowds followed him. Show us a miracle. Feed us. Here's some sick people. They watched and they wanted to see what Jesus did. They were spectating. But then you had the people who all of us can call a disciple. And when Jesus says make disciples, he's saying make Christians. So don't think that a Christian is some other category here. A disciple means follower. That is a Christian. All Christians are disciples. And all of us can testify that there are some good disciples, and then there are some people we wished would turn their life around because they're not being the best disciples. And then as we get further in our Christian life, we become, yes, we're still disciples, but we actually start advocating for it. See, if you look about in the life of, the disciples, they started all watching Jesus. They then started following Jesus and became the 12. And then what happened when they became apostles? They started advocating for Jesus. They started teaching. They started going there. And so you want to break them down. This is sort of how I qualify them. Spectators are searching, they're listening, they're questioning. This group is one of my favorite ones because they ask the best questions. And then your disciple, I qualify, you're no longer searching, but you found it. You found Jesus, you believe. And so you start committing. You start learning how to commit better. You're really learning how to follow. What's a fun way to look at it? And an advocate, you start partnering. You really start loving others. And you start obeying. Now, all of us can say, is it really this neat? No. And we know that. We know that sometimes we love here, but we're having our, we feel like we're going back and forth, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 4 steps back, 5 steps back. Where am I going? Oh, I'm supposed to go forward. And we start walking forward. We know this. And so it's a discombobulated mess, but for the most part, we can see where those who we recognize in our church as faithful, they start partnering, they're loving, they're obeying. We look to them as examples. They're advocating for it. And so this is really the process. Now, what happens is, though, if we want to think about it, there are actually these walls, or I have noticed, for a spectator to become a disciple, they have to cross through a barrier, which is faith, where they have to say, I believe. And so that's a natural barrier there that seems to happen between spectating and discipling. Another natural barrier seems to happen between those who are, we're just calling general disciples, Christians and advocates. And a lot of times that barrier is either fear or a lack of I don't know. And sometimes that's sort of the same thing. There's just this barrier that happens where it's like, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I don't feel like I can take that next step. I'm a Christian, but I don't know enough. And this happens for any ages. I have seen older Christians who are unable to take that step. And I've seen younger, it just sort of happens, but there's sort of this barrier that exists. So here's the one of faith, and here is one there. You guys following with me so far? Roughly? Okay, all right. Now, if we really wanted to be honest, there's actually one more barrier between spectators and outsiders. And this is people that aren't spectating at all because they've never been invited. Really what it is. If you think about it, how in the world are you spectating in the first place? Someone's like, hey, you should come listen to this guy speak. Okay. Boom, you're now spectating. But it takes someone to actually ask. So we can just say there's outsiders who aren't spectating at all. They don't care for whatever reason. They're outside. All right, and it takes someone to ask. Then they spectate, and they're looking, and they ask, and they go, and then they become disciples, and then they become advocates, and yay! Are you guys tracking with me? Yeah? Okay. So if you think about it, Paul was an advocate. Paul was advocating for Timothy, his disciple, to become an advocate and to train more disciples to be advocates. You guys getting me? Okay? Now, this Onesiphorus, who is he? We'll get to who he was here in a second. And then you have those other people, and they are over here in this category, and they were just bad. The two. Completely left and abandoned, and they're actually dangerous. They're in a category we're not even going to talk about. And so that's what you have. You have outsider, spectator, disciple, and advocate. So, what does it take for someone to cross this barrier right here? I'm calling him an introducer. Yep. Is that a word? Don't care. An introducer. One who introduces. Andrew, the disciple Andrew, was an introducer. He loved to introduce people to Jesus. There's some of you who love to introduce people to Jesus. Introduce people to the church. You love to invite people. It's just your thing. I heard a very comical story here the other week about someone trying to introduce, and what they did is they pretty much yelled it at them in the gas station that they should come to church sometime. You know what? More power to you. It's an introducer. Our community group knows exactly who that is. But it takes someone, okay, the barrier of not knowing where it is or not knowing where he is, it takes someone who introduces, okay? You see how that arrow is working? Helps you cross that barrier. The other barrier is a starter. And if you think about it, there's that barrier of faith right there. How do you get someone to walk with you and become from a spectator to a disciple? It takes someone, you can call it a starter, you can call it evangelist, you can call it someone who just has that knack. He just loves to answer questions. They're patient, they're kind, and they can clearly share the good news of Jesus. Shifts through that one. That's a starter is what I'm calling. Someone who helps get that process going. And then we have this one right here, a mentor. How do you get from, I don't know if I can do this, I don't think I know enough, to somebody who can actually say, hey, follow me, I'll show you how this works. And that requires a mentor. Now you might be looking there and say, you know what? All of these sound absolutely terrifying. I'm not good at that. I'm not very good with people. I'm awkward. I literally look like I'm going to throw up every time I talk to someone because it is that terrifying. And how I learned it from back in the day is pretty much that means you are a terrible Christian. But I think we can look at the Bible and say, yeah, that's not too accurate. Because there is a fourth category here, which a lot of us fit in, and that's what I'm calling a partner. And I think what we see here is you have Timothy, who is a mentor, trying to disciple a Timothy to become a mentor. And what's Onesiphorus? He was a partner. He partnered with Timothy at the church of Ephesus, and he partnered with Paul. Some of us are not introducers. Some of us are not starters. Some of us are not mentors. We're partners. And so I asked you, what is your role in this? This is how I want us to start thinking now. When you're asking God, where do I fit in the discipleship process? You can now ask him, am I an introducer? Am I a starter? Am I a mentor? Am I a partner? How are you wired right now? I will say that some of us, I think, have a natural gift at one of these. And then we have a second one we've developed and we're really good at. And then we have our third one and, one that we're not as good at. And I think that we can learn how to be better at all of these. It's not like you're a partner forever. You cannot do anything else in your Christian life ever. You can never share the gospel, never invite anybody. I think we're like, yeah, okay. But we know like, hey, I'm really wired of walking next to somebody through whatever thing they go through, and I'm not going to leave. I'm a partner. And we have other people who can be they just are wired different, and they're like, man, I love inviting people, and I love sharing the gospel. These are what I'm wired at. After that, I don't know what I'm doing, and I will hand them off to somebody else who's better at mentoring. So what is your part? Are you a Paul, a Timothy, a Onesiphorus? Which one are you good at? Because here in a few weeks, I'm going to then ask us, because I want us to begin thinking, hey, I'm really good at introducing people. I think that's my thing. I love getting out. I love being part of the community. I connect really well and really quick with people who are not like me. I would love to do this. I want to figure out who we are in the church, and I'm going to partner with them. And I'm going to say, okay, what do you guys need to help introduce people better? Some of you are like, man, I love sharing the gospel. I love it. Don't know why I'm wired that way. I want to know who you are. Because the goal is to get people, to spectate, get them connected with a starter, and the starter can love on them and help get them to Jesus. But then I need to know who the partners are. And I'm pretty sure we have more partners than anything, because we need them. Mentors need them, disciples need them, even spectators. They just got to have this group that just doesn't leave. They're there with them, and they go. And we're going to figure out who the partners are. And then I want to figure out who the mentors are. Who can actually begin training the disciples to become advocates? Who can walk with them? Who thinks like a teacher, and who can help step through? So that's the question for you today: is who are you? What's your part? Question marks. So if you have any questions on this, you can let me know. But I want us to start praying in regards to this. Am I good at introducing? Do I think I'm being led as a starter? Do I think I could become a mentor? Or am I a partner? And I would like to, learn. And so this is for you to pray about.